The deep space research vessel Horizon drifted silently through the darkness of uncharted space. Captain James Reeves stood at the bridge's main viewport, his weathered face reflecting off the reinforced glass as he stared at the strange planet below. It wasn't supposed to be here. None of their star charts showed any system in this region. "Captain, I'm picking up unusual energy readings from the surface," called out Pete, their sensor specialist. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic display, bringing up streams of data that made little sense to anyone else on the bridge. "They're unlike anything in our database." James walked over to Pete's station, his boots making soft thuds against the metal floor. 20 years of space exploration had taught him that unusual often meant trouble. "Can you be more specific?" "The energy patterns." Pete paused, double-checking his readings. "They're moving, sir, like they're alive." The bridge fell silent. In the corner, Dr. Ann Miller, their lead xenobiologist, nearly dropped her tablet. She rushed over to look at Pete's readings, her eyes widening with each passing second. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "these patterns match the theoretical signatures of shadow stalkers." Everyone on the bridge tensed at those words. Shadow stalkers weren't just another alien species. They were living legends, the bogeymen of the galaxy, crystalline predators that could phase through solid matter, leaving nothing but empty ships and dead worlds in their wake. Most people thought they were just stories made up to scare rookie spacers. "That's impossible," James said, though he couldn't keep the uncertainty from his voice. "The Galactic Council declared this sector safe for exploration. They wouldn't have missed something like this." Dr. Miller shook her head. "The Council's surveys are decades old, Captain, and shadow stalkers are known to be nomadic. They could have arrived recently." Before James could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A familiar chime indicated an incoming message from the Galactic Council's emergency channel, something that hadn't happened in all his years of commanding the Horizon. The holographic display flickered, and a tall, green-skinned council representative appeared. His multiple eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of extreme distress in his species. "Research Vessel Horizon, this is Council Representative Len. You must leave that system immediately. We have confirmed the presence of Class X predatory entities in your vicinity. This is not a suggestion. It is an order." James stepped forward. "Representative, we're a research vessel. If there really are shadow stalkers here, this could be a unique opportunity to study them. We have some of the best xenobiologists in human space aboard." The alien's skin darkened, another sign of agitation. "Captain Reed, you don't understand. The shadow stalkers have wiped out entire civilizations. The Krell Empire, at its height, lost 30 worlds to these creatures in a single cycle. The Meridian Alliance tried to study them. We never heard from their research fleet again. Only empty ships remained, drifting in space." "But," James started to argue. "No buts, Captain," the representative cut him off. "The Council is sending warning signals to all nearby vessels. If you don't leave immediately, we'll have no choice but to quarantine your entire species for reckless endangerment of galactic safety." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. James looked around at his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes. But there was something else too. Curiosity, determination, the very things that had driven humanity to the stars in the first place. "Captain," Dr. Miller spoke up, her initial fear replaced by professional interest, "those energy readings, they're not random. There's a pattern to them. If we could just—" A sudden alarm cut through the air. Pete's console was flashing red. "Multiple energy signatures approaching the ship," he shouted. "They're coming up from the planet's surface." Through the viewport, James watched in awe as crystalline forms rose from the dark planet below. They glowed with internal light, their transparent bodies refracting the starlight like living prisms. Beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The shadow stalkers had noticed them. And now, the real test of humanity's courage was about to begin. James took a deep breath and made his decision. All hands, battle stations, but no offensive actions without my direct order. If these creatures are intelligent, then maybe, just maybe, we can be the first to understand them. Little did they know, this decision would change the course of galactic history forever. Tom Walker knew he had made a terrible mistake. The young research specialist found himself separated from the exploration team, lost in a maze of dark crystalline formations that covered the planet's surface. His suit's oxygen display showed 4 hours of air remaining, but that wouldn't matter if the shadow stalkers found him first. "Base, do you copy?" He spoke into his radio for the 100th time. Static was his only answer. The crystal formations somehow blocked all communications, leaving him completely alone. A soft blue glow caught his attention. Tom froze, remembering the briefing about shadow stalkers. They glowed just before attacking. He pressed himself against a crystal wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. The glow grew stronger. Through the transparent crystal, Tom watched as a shadow stalker emerged from the ground like a swimmer breaking through water. Its crystalline body sparkled with internal lights, creating patterns that seemed almost beautiful. But something was wrong. The creature's form had cracks running through it, and its movements were slow and unsteady. Tom's scientific curiosity began to override his fear. A shadow stalker wasn't attacking. Instead, it collapsed near him, its light patterns flickering weakly. Without thinking, Tom took a step toward it. "You're hurt," he whispered, though he knew the creature couldn't understand him. The shadow stalker's head, or what seemed to be its head, turned toward him. The light patterns within its body changed, creating rapid pulses of color. Tom remembered Dr. Miller's theory about shadow stalkers using light for communication. He pulled out his research tablet and began recording the patterns. The creature watched him, making no aggressive moves. "I'm going to call you Prism," Tom said, trying to keep his voice steady, "since you're all sparkly and everything." He gave a nervous laugh, then immediately felt foolish for trying to make small talk with a deadly alien predator. But Prism's light patterns changed again, becoming slower and more regular. Tom noticed they matched the rhythm of his speech. Was it trying to understand him? He took another step closer, his heart pounding. "I'm Tom," he said, pointing to himself. "Tom." He repeated the gesture. Prism's body glowed brighter for a moment, then produced a pattern of lights that pulsed in a way that somehow reminded Tom of his own name. He gasped. "You're trying to copy me, aren't you?" A crack in Prism's body widened suddenly, causing the creature to shudder. Tom's tablet showed its energy readings dropping. Without thinking about the consequences, he pulled an emergency power cell from his suit's backup system. "Here," he said, placing it near Prism. "It's not much, but it's energy. That's what you need, right?" Prism's body shifted, partially phasing through the ground. The power cell disappeared into its crystalline form. Immediately, some of the smaller cracks began to heal. Tom sat down, keeping a respectful distance but unable to contain his excitement. "This is amazing. You're not just some mindless predator, are you? You're intelligent. You can learn." The next few hours passed in a blur of discovery. Tom recorded everything as Prism's light patterns gradually became more complex. The creature seemed to be trying to match human speech patterns, creating what Tom could only describe as a visual language. His suit radio suddenly crackled to life. "Tom, can you hear us? We've got your beacon." It was Captain Reed's voice. The rescue team must have finally found him. But as Tom stood up to signal them, he realized he had a serious problem. How could he explain that he'd not only encountered a shadow stalker, but had actually helped it? That the galaxy's most feared predator was actually a sentient being capable of communication. Prism's lights dimmed, as if sensing his concern. Then it did something unexpected. It retreated into the ground, disappearing completely. Just before the rescue team arrived, Tom saw a faint glow through the crystals, moving away. Prism was protecting him by hiding. "I'll come back," Tom whispered. I promise." He heard the rescue team approaching, their lights cutting through the darkness. Tom knew his next challenge would be convincing them that everything they thought they knew about shadow stalkers was wrong. But he had to try. Because in those few hours, he hadn't just made a scientific discovery. He had made a friend. 2 weeks had passed since Tom's first encounter with Prism, and he had managed to convince Captain Reed to let him continue his research. The captain had set strict rules. Tom could only meet Prism in a specially built observation area, with armed guards nearby. But even these limitations couldn't dampen Tom's excitement about what he was learning. "The light patterns are getting clearer," Tom explained to Dr. Miller as they reviewed his latest recordings. "Prism isn't just copying sounds anymore. It's creating its own way of talking to us." Dr. Miller nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "But what about the others? The whole group of them that's been watching our base?" She was right. Over the past few days, more shadow stalkers had appeared near the research base. They kept their distance but seemed fascinated by the humans' activities. Unlike Prism, they moved together, their light patterns synchronized in a way that suggested a shared consciousness. Tom was about to respond when his tablet lit up with a familiar pattern, Prism's way of asking to communicate. He hurried to the observation area, Dr. Miller following close behind. Prism emerged from the ground, its crystalline body glowing with welcome. But today, its pattern seemed more urgent than usual. "Something's wrong," Tom said, watching the rapid flashes of light. Over the past weeks, he had gotten better at understanding Prism's visual language. "It's trying to tell us about the others." Through a complex series of light patterns, Prism explained what made it different. The other shadow stalkers were part of a hive mind, sharing thoughts and energy. But Prism had been born separate, able to think independently. This made it both special and lonely. "That's why you were hurt when I found you," Tom realized. "The others don't share energy with you." Prism's lights pulsed in agreement. Then it showed them something else. Images of ships and planets, formed by bending light through its crystalline body. The shadow stalkers didn't mean to harm other species. Their feeding process, absorbing energy from various sources, sometimes accidentally drained living beings. They had never understood that this was wrong, because they had no concept of individual life. Dr. Miller grabbed Tom's arm. "This changes everything. If we could help them find safe energy sources." But Prism wasn't finished. Its lights showed more shadow stalkers approaching the base, drawn by curiosity about these strange beings who had befriended one of their kind. They wanted to understand. A warning alarm suddenly blared through the base. Captain Reed's voice came over the speaker. "All personnel, be advised. The Galactic Council has issued an ultimatum. Either we leave this planet immediately, or they'll quarantine the entire human race." Tom looked at Prism, whose lights had dimmed with what he now recognized as sadness. "We can't leave," he said firmly. "We're so close to understanding them, to changing everything." Dr. Miller was already running calculations on her tablet. "If we could develop an artificial quantum energy source, something that matches their natural feeding patterns." Prism's body suddenly lit up with intense patterns. Through the observation window, they could see other shadow stalkers emerging from the ground. Their lights began to change, shifting from their usual synchronized patterns to individual rhythms. "They're learning from Prism," Tom whispered in awe. "They're starting to think as individuals." Dr. Miller rushed to her computer, fingers flying over the keys. "Tom, look at these readings. Their energy consumption patterns. They're adapting. They're trying to be more careful, more controlled." Outside the base, more shadow stalkers appeared, their lights creating a beautiful display of individual patterns. They were no longer just a hive mind of predators. They were becoming something new. Captain Reed's voice came over the speaker again, but this time it was filled with wonder rather than warning. "Everyone, you need to see this. The whole valley is lighting up. It's beautiful." Tom smiled at Prism, who pulsed with what he now knew was happiness. They weren't just making scientific history. They were watching the birth of a new kind of consciousness. And it had all started because one human had chosen to reach out in friendship instead of fear. The arrival of the research vessel Stellar Dawn should have been good news. Instead, Tom watched from the observation room with growing concern as the rival ship landed near their base. Something about their arrival felt wrong. "They're not here to help," he told Captain Reed as they watched the new ship's crew setting up their equipment. "Did you see their cargo? Those aren't research containers. They're weapon casings." Reed nodded grimly. "I know, but we can't prove anything yet. The Galactic Council gave them permission to be here, same as us." Through the window, Tom could see Prism and several other shadow stalkers watching the new arrival. Their light patterns showed agitation, rapid flickers of blue and white that Tom had learned meant distress. Dr. Miller burst into the room, her face pale. "Captain, Tom, you need to see this." She held up her tablet, showing energy readings from the planet's surface. "The shadow stalker's hive mind is dying. Their energy patterns are breaking down." "What?" Tom rushed to look at the readings. "But they were fine yesterday." "How cooled?" He stopped, his eyes widening as he realized what was happening. "The Stellar Dawn. They're doing something to the energy sources the shadow stalkers feed on." Outside, more shadow stalkers were emerging from the ground, their movements sluggish. Even Prism's usually bright form seemed dimmer. Tom watched in horror as one of the creatures collapsed, its crystalline body starting to crack. "They're poisoning them," he whispered. "The Stellar Dawn isn't here to study them. They're trying to weaken them so they can be captured." Captain Reed immediately hit the base's communication panel. "Stellar Dawn, this is Captain Reed. We're detecting dangerous energy fluctuations in your area. Shut down your equipment immediately." The reply came back smooth and unconcerned. "Captain Reed, we have full council authorization for our research. Please don't interfere." Tom couldn't wait any longer. He rushed to put on his environment suit, but Reed grabbed his arm. "Where do you think you're going?" "I have to help them." Tom pulled away. "Prism trusted us. They all trusted us. We can't let this happen." "The Council has ordered all personnel to evacuate," Reed said firmly. "If we don't leave in the next 6 hours, they'll quarantine Earth. Think about what that means, Tom. Our whole species, cut off from space travel." Tom looked out at the suffering shadow stalkers, then back at his captain. "If we leave now, we're no better than the monsters everyone thinks they are. These beings aren't just some mindless predators. They're becoming individuals, learning to think for themselves. And we're watching them be murdered." The base shook as more shadow stalkers collapsed, their energy failing. Through the window, Tom could see Prism trying to help its fellows, sharing its own energy with them, even though it made its light dim further. The crew gathered around, watching the tragedy unfold. Finally, Reed spoke. "Dr. Miller, what do you need to trace whatever poison they're using?" "Captain," she asked, surprised. "If we're going to save these beings, we need to move fast." Reed turned to address the whole crew. "I won't order any of you to stay. The evacuation ships are ready. But if you choose to help, know that we'll probably be facing charges from the Council." One by one, the crew members stepped forward. Nobody moved toward the evacuation ships. Tom felt tears in his eyes as he watched his colleagues quickly organizing into emergency teams. Through the window, Prism pressed its crystalline form against the glass, its lights forming the pattern that Tom now recognized as his name. "Hold on, friend," he whispered, placing his hand against the glass. "We're not leaving you. Not now. Not ever." Outside, the Stellar Dawn's crew continued their work, unaware that they were about to learn a crucial lesson. Never underestimate humans who have chosen to protect their friends, even if those friends happen to be the galaxy's most feared predators. Time was running out. In the main lab of the Horizon base, Tom and Dr. Miller worked frantically to analyze the poison that was killing the shadow stalkers. Prism lay nearby, its crystalline form growing dimmer by the minute. "The Stellar Dawn is using some kind of quantum energy disruptor Dr. Miller said, studying her readings. It's not just poisoning them. It's breaking down their ability to absorb energy at all. Tom watched as Prism's lights flickered weakly. The pattern was familiar now. Pain, fear, but also trust. Even dying, it still believed in them. Wait, Tom said suddenly, remembering something. The power cell I gave Prism when we first met. It was able to absorb energy from that. What if we could make something similar, but stronger? Dr. Miller's eyes lit up. The quantum reactor. If we could modify it to output energy in a form the Shadow Stalkers can absorb. They rushed to the reactor room, where Captain Reed and the engineering team were already working. The ship's quantum reactor hummed quietly, its blue glow reminding Tom of Prism's lights. We need to reverse the energy flow, Tom explained quickly. Make it output energy in crystalline wavelengths instead of standard power. The engineering team looked doubtful, but Reed nodded. Do it, but be careful. One wrong move, and we could blow up the whole base. As they worked, the situation outside grew worse. More Shadow Stalkers collapsed, their beautiful crystalline forms cracking. The Stellar Dawn's crew had set up a perimeter of energy disruptors, trapping the weakened creatures. Inside the reactor room, sparks flew as the team reworked complex systems. Tom's hand shook as he helped connect new power conduits. One mistake could kill everyone, including the beings they were trying to save. Suddenly, Prism's form moved through the wall, barely visible now. Its lights were so dim they could hardly be seen. No, Tom whispered. Hold on just a little longer. Prism's body wavered, then did something unexpected. It broke off a small piece of its crystalline form and pushed it toward the reactor. The fragment glowed with the last of Prism's energy. It's trying to show us something. Dr. Miller grabbed her scanner. The crystal fragment. It's a perfect energy conductor. If we can integrate it into the reactor. The team worked faster, incorporating Prism's gift into their design. The reactor's hum changed pitch, and new colors began to swirl within it. Energy output is changing, one engineer called out. We're getting crystalline wavelength patterns. Tom looked at Prism, whose lights had grown even dimmer after sharing its crystal. Just hold on, friend. Please. The reactor's glow intensified, now matching the natural light patterns of the Shadow Stalkers. Dr. Miller checked her readings and nodded to Reed. Now or never, Captain, she said. Reed pressed the activation control. The reactor pulsed, sending a wave of crystalline energy through the base. The wave spread outward, washing over the fallen Shadow Stalkers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the creatures began to glow again. Their cracks healed as they absorbed the safe, compatible energy. Even the Stellar Dawn's disruptors couldn't stop this power. It was too pure, too natural. Prism's form brightened suddenly, its lights dancing with joy and life. The pattern it made was new. Tom recognized parts of it as thank you and friend, but there was something more. A deeper meaning that brought tears to his eyes. Through the base's windows, they could see Shadow Stalkers rising from the ground, their bodies bright and strong again. The Stellar Dawn's crew backed away as their weapons proved useless against the rejuvenated beings. They did it, Reed breathed. They actually did it. Tom watched as Prism's lights created complex patterns, teaching the other Shadow Stalkers how to safely absorb the new energy source. Its sacrifice, giving up part of itself to save everyone, had changed everything. The Stellar Dawn's captain's voice crackled over the radio, angry and confused. What have you done? Do you know how many regulations you've broken? Reed smiled as he replied. We just proved that friendship is stronger than fear. You might want to include that in your report to the Council. 1 month after the crisis, the planet had changed beyond recognition. Where there had once been dark crystals and fearsome predators, now there was a glowing city of living crystal, built by humans and Shadow Stalkers working together. Tom stood in the new observation center, watching Prism teach a group of younger Shadow Stalkers. Their lights flickered in different patterns, each one unique individual. The hive mind was changing, evolving into something new. "The council representatives are here," Captain Reed said, entering the room. He looked tired but proud. "They want to see everything." Through the window, they could see the council ship landing. It was larger than the horizon, decorated with the symbols of a dozen alien species. The shadow stalkers gathered to watch, their lights creating patterns of curiosity rather than fear. Dr. Miller rushed in, holding her latest research results. "Tom, you need to see this. The quantum energy grid we built. The shadow stalkers aren't just using it. They're improving it. They're developing their own technology." Before Tom could respond, Prism phased through the wall. Its crystalline form had changed over the past month, developing new facets and patterns that showed its growing intelligence. It created a light pattern that Tom now recognized as laughter. The main door opened, and the council representatives entered. There were 5 of them, each from a different species. They stopped short at the sight of Prism, their bodies showing various signs of fear and surprise. But Prism did something unexpected. It projected a series of images through its crystalline body. Scenes from the past month. Shadow stalkers helping humans build shelters. Humans teaching shadow stalkers about technology. Both species learning from each other, growing together. "Impossible," one council member whispered. "They were mindless predators. We saw them destroy entire worlds." "No," Tom said firmly. "You saw beings trying to survive the only way they knew how. But they can learn. They can change. Just like us." As if to prove his point, more shadow stalkers phased through the walls. Each one glowed with different colors and patterns, proof of their growing individuality. They had learned to be careful with their energy absorption, taking only what they needed from the quantum grid. "The crew of the Stellar Dawn has been arrested," another council member announced. Their attempt to weaponize the shadow stalkers violated multiple galactic laws. "But you, humans," the alien's multiple eyes blinked rapidly. "You have done something we thought impossible." Tom watched as a young shadow stalker approached one of the council members, curious rather than threatening. Its lights created a simple greeting pattern that Prism had taught it. After a moment's hesitation, the council member reached out a hand in response. "We've prepared a full report," Dr. Miller said, stepping forward. "The shadow stalkers are developing their own culture now. They're not just surviving. They're creating art, music, even their own form of writing using light patterns. And more importantly," Reed added, "they want to join the galactic community. Not as predators or victims, but as equals." Prism moved to Tom's side, its lights forming the complex pattern that meant friend, family, future. Other shadow stalkers gathered around, each adding their own light to the display until the room glowed with a rainbow of colors and meanings. The council members watched in amazement as humans and shadow stalkers moved among each other with complete trust. The beings that had once been the galaxy's most feared predators were now telling jokes with light patterns, sharing stories through crystal reflections, and working alongside humans as if they had been friends forever. "Perhaps," the lead council member said slowly, "we need to reconsider many of our assumptions about predator species, and about humans as well." Tom smiled as Prism created a new pattern, one that combined the symbols for change and hope. The shadow stalkers had evolved beyond their primitive beginnings, but so had the humans who had chosen to help them. Together, they had proven that understanding could overcome any barrier, even one built from centuries of fear. 6 months had passed since the council's visit, and the Horizon was ready for its new mission. The ship looked different now. Crystal formations grew along its hull, pulsing with soft light. These weren't just decorations. They were shadow stalker volunteers, ready to help humanity explore deeper into space than ever before. Tom stood on the bridge beside Captain Reed, watching Prism phase through nearby panels, checking the new systems they had built together. The shadow stalker's crystalline form had grown even more complex, reflecting its role as the main translator between the two species. "All systems ready," Prism signaled through light patterns that everyone on the bridge could now understand. The universal translators they had developed together made communication effortless. "Remember when we first met?" Tom asked, smiling at his friend. "You were hurt, I was lost, and we were both supposed to be enemies." Prism's lights created the pattern for laughter, then shifted to show images of their first encounter. The Shadow Stalker had kept that memory, like a precious gem within its crystalline form. Dr. Miller hurried onto the bridge, her eyes bright with excitement. "The new quantum drive is working perfectly. The Shadow Stalkers can phase us through space itself. We'll be able to explore regions we never thought possible." The mission ahead of them was unprecedented. The Horizon would lead a joint human Shadow Stalker expedition to find other misunderstood species in the galaxy. Already, they had reports of strange energy beings in distant nebulae that the Council had labeled as dangerous. "Launch sequence starting," Reed announced. Through the viewport, they could see their base on the Crystal Planet. It had grown into a thriving community where humans and Shadow Stalkers lived and worked together. Young Shadow Stalkers played with human children, teaching them to create simple light patterns while learning human games. Prism moved to the front of the bridge, its form splitting into multiple facets that reflected the stars. Other Shadow Stalkers phased into view around the ship, their lights synchronized in a beautiful display that combined their new individuality with their ancient connection. "Ready for phase jump," Prism signaled. The other Shadow Stalkers began to glow brighter, extending their crystalline influence around the ship. Tom felt a familiar tingle as the ship prepared to jump. The Shadow Stalkers had learned to extend their phasing ability to entire vessels, allowing them to slip through the fabric of space itself. It was safer and faster than any human technology. "Remember," Reed said to his crew, "we're not just explorers anymore. We're proof that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't claws or teeth or energy absorption. It's fear of the unknown." The ship hummed as its quantum drives engaged. Through the crystal growths on the hull, the Shadow Stalkers began to channel their energy. The stars outside began to blur. "New signal detected," one of the crew called out. "Energy patterns similar to the ones we were looking for. But they're afraid, like the Shadow Stalkers used to be." Tom looked at Prism, seeing his own determination reflected in his friend's lights. They had learned so much from each other. Humans had taught the Shadow Stalkers about individuality and friendship, while the Shadow Stalkers had taught humans that appearances could be deceiving. "Then let's go say hello," Tom said. Together, Prism's lights formed the pattern that meant future friendship hope as the ship phased through space. Around them, stars streaked past in rivers of light, reflected and multiplied through the crystalline forms of their allies. The Horizon shot forward into unknown space, carrying its crew of humans and former predators. They weren't just exploring the galaxy anymore. They were changing it, one friendship at a time. As they accelerated toward their destination, Prism created a new light pattern. Tom recognized pieces of it: adventure, discovery, and something else. A new concept that hadn't existed before humans and Shadow Stalkers had learned to work together. The pattern meant unlimited possibilities. The story of humanity and the Shadow Stalkers had started with fear and prejudice, but it had evolved into something more powerful, proof that in the vast darkness of space, the brightest light wasn't the stars. It was hope.